Hello everyone! Happy Tuesday! Welcome to Archetype with me, Ashley. Hope your guys' week has been going well. And let's get into it. So this is week 4 or week 5? I don't know. I think it's week 4. Not really sure how long we've been working on this character at this point now. But yeah, so we finished up and wrapped up all the details and all that stuff for the character. So this week is always the fun week of sculpting and finishing out that stuff once we get the pose finished. So we're gonna come up with a cool little pose for our Druid character here. But before I do that, I want to make some sketches and do some notes real quick. I like to try to sketch maybe an idea of a pose out sometimes. I don't think I've really done this in the stream in the past though, but usually it's because I don't do it on stream. But one thing that I think is important is, this character, we're going to be printing them at a certain size. So it's also important to note. Oh, hello everybody in the chat. Someone inside Sato said it's the first time he's seen the cinematic. Yeah, the cinematic's cool. Makes me look really awesome when, I don't know, don't tell anybody. I'm not as cool as the cinematic is. But yeah, so one thing to note is, if we do some sort of really, I don't know, cool dynamic pose where they're, doing something kind of fun, like that pose could work. But we have to remember that they're going to be on a 1-inch base, right? So if we make something that's like too exaggerated or too crazy, they can't really fit on that base. So there's kind of like a fine balance between the stuff. Also, the base is really small, right? So they're going to be printed really tiny. So another thing that I thought would be cool, but let's think about it, is, I was like, oh, this would be a cool idea for the characters if she's kind of like crouched over, right, with her feral. She's got kind of her pants and stuff. She's kind of like hanging out on like a rock ledge or something, right? That might be cool. I think that pose is really fun. But if you think about it, if your character is normally this tall, right, and then you're putting them on a 1-inch base, now you're making your character that's already really small even smaller. So it's kind of for the final that we're going for, this might not be the best pose to execute because you're just going to deal with the character that's now even smaller when you go to print that stuff. So I think that's the biggest thing that I want to kind of discuss when I'm thinking about how I want to pose this character is you want something that is easily readable from the scale in which we're choosing to do our sculpt. So while the crouching pose might seem cool, we're kind of not giving ourselves the real estate to really show off that character's silhouette. So I want to try to avoid anything that's too crouchy, but I don't want her to feel too normal either. Like we still want to kind of sell this like feral vibe. So, we can still do kind of like the spread legs. Feel like she's in a good fighting position, but nothing too super dynamic. Nothing too like Spider-Man-y, we don't want to go too far. We could do something where it's more like maybe she's casting a spell since she's a spellcaster. So we could do something more along the lines of just kind of throwing a spell out. And it would help us maybe get kind of like a contrapposto type pose going on. If we did something maybe like that. We're also going to make sure that her hands try to stay somewhat together and stuff too. Because that'll be easier for printing. But that cape is also going to be a really nice part of her silhouette that's going to sell her as a character. So we might be able to do something like that, or we might be able to also, I want to come up with something cool, because if we do, I mean, there's also some poses that could be interesting, but they're not that hard to pose, to be honest. Where if we do something where maybe she's kind of, you know, sticking her hand out towards you, but her pose is a little more together. Something more like this, you know, where her feet are more together. And we could do something where, I mean, in my other drawing, she actually has like this giant bone scythe type thing. I don't think I drew that for the reference, but I drew another drawing of her, and she's got like this kind of like T-Rex skull bone scythe thing that I was or wasn't going to add to the D&D figure, but that's because, you know, a scythe like this could be kind of hard to print as one whole thing. But she could be holding something like that as well, and then she'd have her hair and she'd be having her hand stick out towards you. You know, we could do something along the lines like that. But I like to kind of just go in, and they don't have to be anything fancy or special. You know, these can be like really rough, but I do think it helps to kind of just warm up with some posing to get an initial idea of the character. You know, I also like the idea of her, maybe she's kind of like hunched over. But again, depending on how tall that makes our character, it might not be the best silhouette for a character that's, you know, going to be really small when we print them. But maybe something that's kind of leaned over where she kind of feels like she's in like a pouncing position or something might be kind of fun. Right? Just to get some ideas on paper before spending all the time in 3D. Because if any of you guys have joined me for this stream before, you guys know that posing in 3D isn't always fun, especially when we don't have a character that's rigged. It's just more of a, you know, ZBrush for a sculpt type thing. So, you know, just having like some sort of kind of plan or something to think about would be kind of cool. I think one of the ideas too that I wanted to try was to give her something that felt a little, not that she's weak, but something to give her a little more of a uniqueness. Is I like the hunched over idea, but what if we do something where like her legs are slightly more like bowed in? Or at kind of like a weirder angle that feels a bit more animalistic. Might like the idea of both of her hands going back and kind of being like a claw type position. That could be kind of fun. So we could do something that's kind of more along the lines of something like that. Just so she feels a little more wild or different, you know? So maybe it just feels like her fighting style just doesn't feel like a normal character would, since she's more of a, you know, she's a druid, so she's more wild and wilderness type based. And her fighting style is more animalistic, so we might try to make it feel like she uses her legs or her stance is just a little different. than like, I don't know, a paladin fighting or something like that, right? So we could play with something like that. I think that's where I want to start, is doing something like this, and see where we go from there. Yeah, or something like that could be cool, where she's kind of like clawing forward. We can play with it maybe a little bit, but I kind of like this initial idea, because I think it will leave enough height for our character, so that way we maximize our print size, while also showing like a bit of uniqueness in her fighting style. So with that being said, for now I can just hide the base, because it's going to be a pain to pose it on the base. If we need to scale her up or down just a little bit to fit, or move her legs or something later, that'll be easier to do later than to do in the initial pose. So I'm going to hide anything that I don't need for her initial posing, right? Which means I also probably don't need this, because again, usually this type of stuff I've done before, kind of gets just in the way, and it's easier to pose after the fact. So now we have basically this. We can go ahead and also note, you know, we have ropes and stuff, but when we go to say our transpose master to pose it, you'll see that they'll just turn into like polygons, because they're not actual geometry yet, which is good, because it's going to be easier to pose this. This is what it's going to turn into, rather than posing, you know, that. That's a lot of geometry to work with. Same thing with like the belt and stuff. So that being said, we're going to go to our T-pose master. Go ahead and say T-pose mesh. And let's start figuring out pose. And remember, I sculpted some pants and stuff before, and her shirt, but I didn't keep it, because when you pose a character, you know, you have to kind of redo that stuff. So I just duplicated it and saved a different one. You can see that this is flipped also, but don't worry about flipping it again. I feel like it usually ends up breaking your T-pose if you do. So just turn on double, and then you can see what you're doing for everything, and it should be fine. She feels a little short to me now, but we'll worry about that later. The belt might be a pain. This rope might be a pain to pose, but we'll keep it in and see how it goes. So to start with, I'm going to go ahead and group everything that I want to move as a whole first, and then so horns, face, hair, eyes, all these little bits, along with her hair, and real hair is also back there, which we could have hidden, but it's fine. It's just going to move with everything else, so I'm going to go ahead and group all that as one piece. Now I can go ahead and I'm going to grab everything that's her torso. But one thing to note first is I'll probably go ahead and run an auto group on this. And I'm just going to go through and pick we're going to do her torso. Shrink that. So I'm just grabbing little sections that I'm shrinking it, and then so that way I can just polygroup things together in an easier fashion. So now we can grab this guy, grab this one, and I'll take the cape. And this can all be grouped as one thing, except for the sleeves. So I'm going to do the same thing as I'm going to grab around this, and I'm going to shrink it, until I need it. So about there, group all that. So now I have the sleeve with this and her arm, right? I'm gonna grab the other side just because it's easier to do this right now. Having all those little pieces, and then I can group them, and then I can get rid of that and group another side. And now I have the left and the right. It's really hard to tell, so I'm gonna, there we go. Now it's just easier to break up. Now I'll go ahead and grab everything that makes up her belt. I like to keep the belt and the torso kind of all separate pieces, so all of this, except for her legs. This will be all one piece. And then I'm also going to make these a left and a right. And then I can grab her pants, group those. And you can see that this is kind of merged. I'm not too worried about it because you don't really see this part of her, but we're still going to split it in half. The same thing with this, actually, is we're going to, it's gonna be a pain in the butt. I've definitely posed worse. I think the hardest thing to pose that I've done on stream was the alchemy fox dude. So, Sleepy Mushroom, hello there, welcome back. I'm gonna go ahead and hide this, and again, I'm gonna try to find that line that I've made in the past. It goes around and creates a nice loop. Which is something like that. Go ahead and group that. And then I'll try to grab the middle here. That. There we go. Now we have those two things split, and now I should be able to grab this and the pants here, and those should really probably function as one piece. Now we have left, right, and then I think these two are together, but I'll probably just run. Oops. Do an auto group on this real quick. I'll just always select these pieces kind of separately, so that way we have like the utmost control for when we're moving them. It shouldn't be too bad because I don't think we're moving and twisting your character that much, so it shouldn't be too big of a deal. You can see why I keep everything usually super low, because if you don't, you can see what happens is, thankfully we don't have to move this around, but imagine if your whole piece was this dense, it'd be really annoying to move around. Oh, Saisato's asking how I shrank the polygons. You can select something, and as long as there's kind of like an open hole, Control-Shift-S to shrink, Control-Shift-X to expand. It'll just continue to expand until it can't anymore. So that's how I'm doing that. I'm going to go ahead and put that together. I'm not worried about this little bit. I can either delete it or, you know, fix it later. It's fine. It's going to be merged with the base anyway, so it shouldn't be too bad. And now we have our colors. So this is just a lot easier to pose. So now basically what I can do is I can select the piece and I can smooth out that transition. And then hopefully, as long as I pose it in the right spot, I should be able to move the character relatively easily without any sort of crazy deformation. The only thing we have to do now is grab. We just have to grab the leg with it. Or we could do something such as find the point there. I know it seems tedious, but it will always help you in the long run, doing something like this. Just kind of lining up so that way I can grab the right area. But it'll be a lot easier to pose and get this stuff set up if we just make sure that everything kind of moves together in a really easy way. Glad you learned something new. That's my goal. All right, so now that I think we've got everything lined up, let's go ahead and kind of start posing her. So the first thing I like to do is, Wookie, hello. We are posing. The first thing I like to do is I'll move the torso. And start kind of giving a slight contrapposto. It's the easiest thing to start with posing characters. So I can go ahead and grab all of the bottom. And I can mask it. And because her torso is within, you know, this section, technically I could just kind of start twisting it without really deforming anything. And it should look fine. Because we have that belt to kind of save us from that. And we can always kind of adjust and rotate things later as we need. But I can start with something like that. And let me see. We kind of have, so we have this hip that's facing forward in this case. So I'll just stick with that. And then instead of, you can see that in my drawing, I actually have both kind of facing that way. But I think in this case, I will turn this one. So in reality, it'll look kind of more like that. You can see how much more twisty and dynamic that actually is going to be. And then we'll have our characters' face, make sure that they're facing this way. So we want the hips facing this way, torso facing this way, and then again the face facing the other way. So then you get this kind of nice zigzag, and that's what contrapposto basically means. Is it's a balance between the hips and the shoulders. You'll see a lot of sculptures kind of do something like this where the shoulder's high, and this is the weight-bearing hip that comes down, and then you have your pose. You know, you can have a sassy hip or whatever it may be, right? So that's kind of what we're moving. It creates a nice flow. Whereas if you were to do something opposite to that, it looks kind of funky. You know, and just pose yourself and you'll realize that your body naturally will kind of go into contrapposto because it's trying to balance and find its center of gravity, right? When you're looking at these things. So the pivot of your neck usually is going to be your plumb line, which is where the weight or your center of gravity is. So as long as, you know, your figure is balanced between this, your character will feel like it's got balance. Corey, hello. This waist belt looks cool. Thank you. I'm glad that it looks cool. So we're gonna go ahead and turn her belt a little bit. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. You don't have to like twist it like crazy yet. You can just do a little bit, because then what we'll also do is make sure that the torso goes the other way. And I might have drawn that. Yeah, I flipped it. Why am I flipping things? Oops. Let me get back to ZBrush. Doesn't really matter as long as we know that one's twisting one way, and then we can have their head face the other way. It's fine. So a slight twist, you can see that this is facing that way, she's facing this way, and then we can grab her head, kind of position it and find it. And again, I'm trying to pose the gizmo where the head would probably rotate from. I look at it from straight on, which should be able to. Now when we rotate her head, you can see it kind of deforms, and we can turn her head. And we can always clean up stuff later. And then I can worry about posing the hair later too, to give it more flow or anything. But for now, it's just easier to pose all of it at once, right? To get a basic idea. And then we can then make adjustments to individual ones later. But I can start to turn her head a bit. And we'll adjust this more because we're going to lean her down. So, but I'm just giving the basic idea of contrapposto. So her hips are facing one way, chest the other way. And then her head will be facing, you know, a slightly different direction. And I like doing this because then you know which foot would be forward versus which leg would be backwards, and then you're going to switch that position for, you know, the upwards pose. And if you ever get confused about posing, you have you as a reference. So, you know, just take a picture of yourself or pose, or, you know, pretend that you're punching and see where your arm goes and where your hand goes, or, you know, get in a fighting pose and try to feel it and figure out, you know, what feels natural and how do you feel balanced. And that helps create a lot of natural looking poses as well. Now we have that. I'm going to also go ahead and grab her torso and everything here. And I'm going to mask this. And I'm also going to try to mask. I'm going to mask a bit of the bottom of this. And then I'm going to invert it, and I'm going to kind of tap to soften that mask. So then when I bend her over, I should get like a pretty smooth transition. Same thing if I was to twist now, you can see that the twisting is more organic. But now I can take her, making sure that her torso feels kind of positioned, and I can kind of start to bend that down a bit more. I did go back on the hair. It does give her the more of a wild look for sure. I can make it more crazy later. It's not really technically done, but I didn't want to spend the stream working on hair because hair always takes the longest most of the time. So cool. So now we'll know that this foot is the one that's going to be facing forward. So I can go ahead and mask that. And we'll go ahead and give that a test to see how that performs. And again, always trying to pose it where the joint would actually be. So trying to find where the great trochanter in her step would be. That looks like it's deforming pretty well. You can see that her leg, I think, is popping out from it, but that's, again, not too worried about that. So we can make this come up. You know, if her leg's popping out and that bothers you, you can always use the move tool to start to move that down and then bring, you know, this part up and start trying to like blend that a little bit. So from here, if we wanted to like get that to go down a little farther, I can go ahead and just grab your pants, which again, you can always just hide the parts that you don't need. In this case, I kind of just forgot that our legs were back there. We can grab that. I can just use the move tool to slowly move this stuff up, you know, and smooth some stuff out. Move this stuff around to try to help with the deformation. I don't want to do too much right now because we're not done posing the other side yet, right? But that's an easy way you can start kind of adjusting this stuff. You just want to be careful. It seems like a tedious amount of work, but it's really not that bad once you just kind of get into the hang of these things. And now we'll go ahead and try to find where her knee would be. We can kind of and again, I talked about like kind of bowing your leg, so you can go back to masking that. And going back to here. And maybe spreading this out and rotating this down a bit. And it just doesn't look quite right yet until we get all the other parts posed. Which is another thing too, is don't spend too long on one section until you get the rest of it going. Because then you can't really tell how the rest of it's going to look. Also for her rope, I might just end up posing that at the very end. So I can just isolate one of these and just kind of blend it. So I'm not going to worry about that right now. So again, mask it. If you flip back and forth and invert your mask, you'll get kind of a more average smooth between the two. So now I can kind of position and see rotator leg within, right? So we get that kind of bowed look. And now we can go ahead and take this one. I'm saying it looks so complicated to make the pose. It's a little complicated when you first see it, but the more you do it, you know, the easier it gets. It always looks like a lot, and then it's really actually not too bad. So we'll do something like that. And then maybe we'll have her, you know, on her toes or something. Remember, you kind of have to hide like the top half, because you're like, oh, it doesn't look like that dynamic yet, right? And a lot of that has to do with the fact that her whole the whole body is not posed yet. So remember, just kind of one step at a time. Try to get this stuff to feel kind of right. I'm twisting her ankle so I get kind of a flat thing. And I'll do the same here. You can also, I can kind of twist her ankles in a little bit too. Help sell that kind of bowed look. Right? Right, something kind of like that. You go ahead and mask her arm. Try to find where that shoulder placement would be. You can see as I move, this might be a little too much, right? So I can go in and try to like mask that little area. kind of blend it away from there if I feel like too much of it's moving with my character. And I won't worry about the cape. I can always adjust that stuff after the fact. So just looking back at my reference, she'll have to be a little more leaned forward, I think. I'm going to go ahead and try to stick her arm out more and up. And then the thing that will help this too is getting her hand to raise up. And we don't have to pose the fingers here. We'll pose them after the fact. Same thing on the other side. Trying to make sure that that socket feels like it's in the right place. Just don't scale it down. And she might need more twisting too. So I think more twisting and more bent over, scaling to get her into a more dynamic pose. Again, I can mask this stuff. I'll point at that. Whoa, don't do that. Mask all that. Also turn on dynamic to see if, you know, turning on your dynamic perspective will help kind of see how the pose is looking. Again, I'm going to take her torso, head, I'm going to mask this part. Try to snap her joint to the back here. That's a little better. And then I can always adjust the cloth and stuff later. You can see how this stuff might be sticking in or out or whatever it may be. But you can either just mask that now, and I can move it and adjust it, you know? Or I can just always, again, fix it later. But these are just matching her back. And the cape, I can always move later. I'm not going to bother fixing all that stuff right now, right? And then again, now I can make her face a little more interesting of a pose, so I can now grab this area. Oh, Velasco's saying that this character reminds him of the brownies from the Willow movie. Yeah, it's very similar to that. When you said brownies, I thought you were talking about that old children's book, Dragon Rider. I don't know if any of you guys know that book, but There's a brownie in it, but it's like a weird, furry, like cat creature thing in that book. It's not human. But yeah, Willow's a great movie. I love that movie. Now we can turn her head more. And I think her legs need to feel like they're even more bowed in. Part of me is wondering, I'm gonna see what it looks like if I move this backwards. It's kind of like a more like a, almost like a Wolverine pose. To me, it feels more feral if I do that. And again, I'm gonna have to squish a lot of the shirt, and there's a lot of sculpting that comes later with that. Also, her arm gets a little stretched, so I can move that in. And move this stuff out, right? All right, now I want her feet to bow in a little more, so I'm gonna grab. Something maybe more along the lines of that. Oops. I'm sure all that stuff's masked. That's feeling a little better. Well, I can probably just mask this and that. And just slightly bend that and move that in. And maybe push this leg out a bit more. Maybe push this leg out a bit more. I don't mind adjusting the proportions slightly to make it feel like a slightly more dynamic pose, or like kind of warping her feet so they feel like they're really squishing and like pushing against one another almost. I think reading her character too, she feels a little off balance right now because you can see where her plumb line is really far forward. So we can take her bottom half and try to kind of her whole body needs to kind of move forward a little bit. We could also maybe try to have it at a angle where she's maybe stepping on like a little rock or something. That could be kind of cool. But now that we have that, I can easily go in here and grab this, grab her torso. Oops. Do that again. Try to move that in a little bit. We get kind of an idea of like a stretch here, right? And then there's going to be a squash on the other side. Character height. I think someone's asking about the character height, Corey. Are you talking about for the D&D character? Because we're going with standard. I think it's like inch and some change. Yeah, it's like 32 millimeters or something like that. I don't remember. It's not exactly an inch. It's a little more than an inch. Trying to see if we can accentuate that squish and then twist, maybe. I think that's fine. And then I actually think I'm gonna do it again. Moving this arm a lot, guys. That's all part of the process. I just don't think her arm being back is helping. I think it needs to be slightly more forward and Have you tried bending your elbow? We can do like some cool hands make a lot of the pose, by the way. So accentuating that she's maybe like doing like a claw or something when we're done posing it will help a lot too. And also adjusting, you know, her sleeves are like defying gravity right now, right? So adjusting all that stuff after the fact is also going to really sell the weight of the pose as well. And then I'm gonna make one last adjustment to her head, and then I think we can call it a day from being in the Transpose Master. And then all the other adjustments that we can make can be after the fact. And we can also look at, you know, the pose from the silhouette view and see how that's feeling. So I think that's pretty cool, and I think putting her little foot on like a little rock or something will add a little bit to the base as well. So we'll have fun with that. Maybe feel like she's kind of like jumping and like about to like push off of it or something. So maybe most of her weight is, you know, in her foot here, which we can kind of accentuate by making her foot a little more compressed on this side, or have a bit more volume on this side. We could do something where maybe her whole foot is pressed up against the rock. So instead of it being on her toes, we'll have her whole foot kind of compressed up against it. And that might help sell that she's kind of on that side. We can also try to do one last thing of like a slight lean. Because if you're jumping on a rock, you're kind of like compressing on that side. I think that works. We can see what she also will look like later when we put the mask on her too. We can kind of have fun with that. And then I'm just going to bring her head down just so I can kind of not have to mess so much with her neck. Things like that are a little easier to do here than they are to do later. Okay, that's feeling a little better. Wookie is asking, will this piece be printed as a whole figure or in parts? Because it's so small, you can usually print it as one full figure. But if it was to be bigger, then you would print it into parts. I'd like to print a bigger one, and I think that would be fun. But I'm not sure if I'd want to do this pose for a bigger one. I think it'd be more fun if I was to do a bigger one to do her like more crouched and like hanging on something or doing like a branch that she's like resting on or something. I think that could be kind of fun. But again, we're doing a pose that's a little bit more upright and slightly more simple because we're dealing with a character that's going to be tiny. So if we hunch her over into a little crouch ball, you know, what could be a 1 3/4 tall figure is now going to be like less than 1/2 inch. So he's going to be really tiny, and it's just not going to sell as well doing that. So that's why we're kind of going with a pose that's a little more upright than maybe what we would normally do. But we're trying to, again, try to pose within our limitations. I think is an important thing to maybe demo or show in this case, because we are printing for a very specific size and a very specific purpose. So now we're going to go ahead and T-pose it. Yeah, the bigger something gets, the more you usually have to split it up into different parts. And there's all the little pieces starting to get in there. And there we go. And you can see how actually pretty clean we've gotten all the stuff to match, and how much easier it'll be now that they're separate. We can start making slight adjustments. Oh, something got skipped. I don't know what got skipped. I don't see anything out of place that got skipped. So I think we're okay. I don't see anything, so I don't know. But yeah, so now for like her body and stuff, if we wanted to, we can kind of pull, also make sure symmetry's off now. We can go ahead and pull this stuff in. But I actually like being able to pose it. Now you see you can have the full body. It looks a little silly in certain areas, but this is where you can go down to your low subdivision. You can smooth some of this stuff out. And you can see that you can easily get back a lot of your anatomy and kind of start fixing some of your sculpt if you needed to. And, you know, sculpting and fixing stuff like that, it's really just a matter of sculpting in some twist and some stretching and squashing and kind of readjusting some of this stuff. And it's not too bad to fix, you know, if you really needed to. Fixing it's not that bad. So just a note. But in this case, you know, we don't see any of that, so we don't have to worry about it. For her fur, we can start adjusting. I knew I would have to adjust this and be able to take this and pose all this stuff down and create kind of a pinch where her knee would be. Because remember, these pants go farther down than the knee. They surpass the knee. They're not right at the knee. But it was just easier to pose it this way and then, you know, make the adjustment later for, you can see her knee, where her knee is there. And same thing here. We can give the slight hint of where that knee is and kind of start adjusting this stuff to kind of match that pose. These are all the little adjustments that'll make your character's pose come to life a little bit more, is giving these like curves and straights where your stuff is. So making sure that you're really accentuating where the stretch of that knee is. And then when we sculpt on top of it, it'll feel really good. It's things like that that I think when you're posing it, maybe it's something that you're not really thinking about. Maybe it's something that initially maybe you didn't think I would be thinking about either. But I think it's those little adjustments that are going to make or break certain poses, and also giving this feeling like there's gravity, or you know, if we need to resculpt the way this first sits, we can. You know, if we need to pull it down more, pull it up more, give it more volume or something like that. When we're posing specifically for a maquette, you know, making sure that the fur is wrapping around the character properly. And also save. And instead of, don't overwrite your T-pose, just call this one posed. Cool. Now I can take, you know, the shirt here, for example. This doesn't even have subdivisions on it yet. And now I can move this stuff down. And again, I like having the body still underneath there because it gives me a good base. But now I can kind of push, maybe the sleeves are kind of pulled back, right? Because she's like in a twisting action or movement. So now we can kind of start playing with the flow of these things. Oh, Ramafu is asking, how do I rotate the canvas without driving from an empty space? So that's a navigation thing in ZBrush. Is you can right-click navigate, or you can left-click navigate. In this case, if you right-click navigate, you can drag on your character. If you left-click, you'll start moving stuff around, but right-click navigation won't. So I have my pen set up to be left-click, right-click on my first little button, and then middle-click on my back button. So then to rotate, I'm just hitting right-click to move around, and it's the same navigation. You're just hitting right instead of left, and then when I'm ready to sculpt, I can put my pen to the tablet and sculpt it. Now what we can do too is we can push this side up against your body, but then maybe make this side feel like it's kind of flying out to give a sense of direction. We can maybe fold this under and kind of fold that back. Give it a feeling like she just jumped and is about to, like, you know, shoot herself forward. And now we can grab a big brush and move this all out. And we can always resculpt a lot of this too, but I can start kind of giving some curvature to that. This is also sculpted in symmetry, which we don't want for later. I'm still going to have it pressed against the cape. Reason being is because, again, we're printing it. We can add like a little bit of a lip or something like that to give it some breakup. But I want it to push up against the cape, but we can start to kind of give that some more flow. You know, and maybe it's now overlapping on this shoulder more than it would on the other because of the way she's twisting, right? I'm gonna try to find a bit of where her shoulder is. It's not, doesn't have to be completely accurate. And now I can grab my big plane, my big cape here, where I can put that over everything. And again, I can maybe make that, push this a little more forward. I can raise this up a bit to make it feel like it's... And we're going to adjust the bottom plane too to add some thickness to this. So that way you're not printing this super thin thing. We'll actually be printing something much thicker, even maybe probably filling in the back area entirely. Because you're never going to see it from looking, you know, up. So if you just fill all this in, you can't tell. So, you know, we might do even something like that, but I probably won't do that for, you know, depending on how much time we have. We only have an hour, so I still have to sculpt the pants and sculpt the shirt in this pose, and also pose her fingers, and then give her maybe a cool little expression. You know, we can kind of play from there. I'm also going to go ahead and merge down her mask now, because it doesn't need to be separate. But we could even see what her mask would look like if it was put on. Oops. Right, so it looks something like that, which is pretty cool. We could choose whether or not the hair would stick out of it or, you know, stick into it. I think the hair would stick out, and then maybe her fur would obviously come up more. So, you know, we could even play with, maybe she is wearing her mask or maybe she isn't. For the fact that it's so small, I like the idea. I like the silhouette that the horns bring when they're, you know, up on her head. And also just adds more personality. Like, you can actually see her face and stuff, which is cool. So, but yeah, I like the idea that I can choose to pull her hair or to pull the mask down if I want to. Let's go ahead and pose the hands. So for this, hands are always together, but it's easier to just make sure that you just split these away. So I'm going to go ahead and split hidden, because they share the same polygroup. So if you don't split them and then you start masking stuff, it gets a little messy. You might accidentally pose one thing over another. So for me, it's easier to grab this, take that one, auto group this, and now I have postable. I did save. I saved. So I said I did. I saved. I'll do it again just for you though, because you reminded me. I did save the pose one though. So if I'm thinking about, you know, if I want our hands to look like claws, I can look at it. I can see that this is going to be the highest. There's going to be an arc from my index down to my pinky, and my pinky gets pretty close to my palm to create kind of like a claw. We could do something fun where maybe she's got like a weird pose, maybe something like a dragon. I think maybe like a dragon's talon, or maybe she's got her two middle. You know, do something that maybe feels more feral or alien. That way we really sell that her fighting style feels more nomadic, and maybe what you're used to. And again, just use your hands as a fun reference. That hurts my hands to do, but I'm gonna do it for the sake of art. And again, we can always sculpt on top of this stuff later. Get like a general idea. So I want these two to actually kind of come together a bit more. So I'm going to mask these two, and then I'll grab both of them. I'm going to try to just kind of pose them from the middle. This should work pretty well. Oops, something isn't masked back here. There we go. Just trying to find the average so that way when I move it, they kind of both move at the same time. Saves me posing time to do something like that. And then if I need to adjust it, I can always use the move tool to put them together a little bit more. Just using my own hand as reference. You can do the pose then, you know, shouldn't be too wild, too crazy. Maybe something like that. Ah, that smooth is dangerous. Her pinky's feeling really big for some reason too. And then we'll make the thumb come out more. And then what I'm going to do as well is because this mini is small, right? It's a mini. I'm going to make your hands a lot bigger. Right? Like that feels pretty weird. Not fun. Kind of adjust the positioning of the connection point between these. This is pretty thin too, so I might, you know, you could later beef up her arm a little bit. And it's the same thing with the hands too. Like in reality, printing this, I'd actually probably beef up her hands to look something. I know it looks really weird, but for printing, I would actually kind of beef her hands up to look something like that, which is crazy, right? Because it looks really weird. But if you were to zoom out to where how big she's probably going to be, see how that makes it the silhouette of her hands read so much better from that size. So again, when you're printing for stuff, you got to remember it's not always what you think is right. Like these fingers at this scale just need to be a lot fatter and a lot bigger, right, in order to read. So that's scary looking at it like this, right? But for the sake of the print, it's going to print that detail a lot better. And that's something I think if you're not used to 3D printing or like maquette making specifically, that's really weird, is like things that look pointed aren't actually pointed. They're actually pretty fat or rounded because from far away, you're selling the silhouette of it. You know, we're not getting in there into like tiny pore details or anything. It's just about making sure that that claw reads. And also, you know, I mean, if it's really tiny, that's like the easiest thing that's going to be able to break off. So we want to make sure that we're supporting it in a way that's friendly. So, you know, adding this stuff to make it a little thicker actually isn't that bad. So, and you can always save your sculpt kind of like a before and after of one that would be just for show, you know, a nice little sculpt that you have, and then one that's like the actual print, because you'd be surprised how different they really are. I'm just adding like some points here so that way we get a little bit of a sharper. Very weird, and it's very different for people to try to do, because you know, maybe this, I mean, this hand needs a lot of work, but you know, this hand might look a little more natural than the one that I just inflated and made look really weird and crazy. But for printing purposes, it's kind of the way to go. So I'll do the same here. Going to do kind of the same treatment. If you can get the kind of the profile of it, it's a little easier to pose this stuff. So this is another way to do it. Is kind of try to get the profile of these things. And then you can usually pose it pretty quickly. Now I could, if you pose your hand, you're going to use the same pose on the other side. You can technically duplicate it, mirror it, and go just place it, right? But I don't know why your pinky looks so big to me now. So, whoops. Oh, symmetry was turned on. Don't do that. Right. This is just another quick way to pose. And again, make your hand a lot bigger. We can adjust the other stuff later. Hand looks a little too long, so I feel like it needs to get wider and then a little shorter. And these are kinds of adjustments that you can continually always make. You know, they don't have to be perfect. Remember, we're pretty imperfect as creatures to begin with. So this type of stuff, you're widening and then shortening the palm and doing whatever. Especially for something so small, you wouldn't be able to notice. But even for something big, you can't tell if the hands are sized differently. And then, of course, with a pose finger, these are really noodly and weird looking right now. But that just takes some going in and sculpting for them to not look like ET salad fingers, you know. Hands will always look really weird until you get those joints feeling right and those crevices and the pinching and stretching that kind of happens, or like those folds when you fold up a finger, for it to look kind of correct. And also fingernails, and a lot of times too, making something feel like a finger end is flattening this part here, but also, you know, rounding this side. Seems like my pen pressure doesn't want to work. But yeah, flattening out this side helps a lot to give the look of a fingernail, and kind of like this, the thumb that we're, the end point that we're used to. Let me turn on my Kiwi on tablet thing. Let's see if that helps. Corey's asking, in martial arts, people have bony and grace fans. Do you think chubby hands look good? Again, they're chubby because, not because of the character being chubby, but because we're printing at a small scale. So they just need to be thicker and bigger than you think in order to be displayed small. Because on my screen right now, if you're looking at this fairly full screen, our character in real scale is probably going to be, about that big. So if your hands are too tiny and too dainty for the fact that we're printing it, they'll just break off, or they won't grow, or they just won't look good because you won't be able to read the hand. So we're making them bigger for printing purposes, not because her hands need to be chubby. So that's why we're doing that. And again, with this piece, what I'll do is I would extrude this in pretty thick. Mask this area. Yes. That part's getting, whoa! My smooth is being all out of shape because I think I lost my pen pressure. There we go. Yeah, you can make this a little thicker. And see, what I would actually do to print this is I would print this underneath it. So that way I help give that thickness. And then I'm just hiding it. Because in reality, when you're looking at a character this big from this far away, you're not really going to see that. But one thing you can do is you can slide this edge down. Oops, I lied. Don't do that yet. What you want to do is insert some sort of edge loop along here, right? So you're maintaining the thickness for most of it. And now what you can do is slide that edge loop down, and you'll see that you'll get most of the thickness. You'll get the thickness where you need it to support, but you'll make it look like it's a thin edge when it's really not. So you can do something like that to kind of, there you go. So you can do something like that. So as you can see how thick the surface, the piece actually is, but then when it comes to the edge, we can kind of move this around and make sure that this is kind of all fitting underneath, and that'll help attach it too. Because again, from such a small character, I'll probably just keep it like that, because when you're looking at the character like this, can you see it? No, you can't see it. It's all good. As long as you make sure that there's some depth in there, but it's being supported, totally fine. So we haven't moved this sleeve down yet, so let's do that. Again, I don't even mind shoving that up in there and making it eventually just all one giant piece is totally fine. And I will cap this off as well. I'll just close the hole, so that way you can't see anything within it. That's her hair. You never see that part of her hair. And all this will just get filled in. Keep it nice and tight. So, adding big pieces like this, from this close up, it may seem weird, it may look weird, it may seem too thick or kind of odd. But again, for these size prints, you want something to help kind of support your model And so something like this, even though that looks really chunky and annoying, again, from the specific angle that we're working in, you can't see it at all, you know? So when you go to print it, it's gonna be really small, and it's on a tabletop, you were not gonna see that, so. Just keep all that stuff in mate. Sleepy Mushroom is saying he's curious about something. Do I use alphas for skin details on something this stylized? That's totally up to you. It's kind of a personal preference. In this case, no, because at any scale that I'm going to print this at, you're probably not going to see skin detail. Now, what you can do, what I find actually helps, is if this character is printed at even a larger scale, what I will do is you could go to surface and add, make sure the color's turned off, but you could add a bit of noise, make that scale a little smaller. So you can add a bit of noise, something like this, and apply it, and then when you decimate it, you'll get a bit of breakup on the surface, so it's not so smooth. And I find that 3D prints actually look a lot better when you add like a slight noise to them, because they decimate across the board a lot more evenly because it has this like even detail. It's a trick that we used to do for hard surface pieces, or for pieces that maybe didn't have all the topology and like all the right details and things like that. I'm gonna go ahead and start sculpting because I only have about 30 more minutes here. I'm going to go ahead and auto group this real quick. I'm going to adjust these so they feel like they're sitting. Out on the surface. And these would get a lot thicker too, by the way. This is super thin for what it is. So I could just duplicate that piece underneath that I had before. I don't know if you guys remember that I had that, and just thicken it up and it'll look great. You can start adding some asymmetry to this, so making this feel like it's riding higher, right? So it feels like it's organic and it's moving with the character. Same thing with this. Push this up more so we can see it more. Oops, I'm turning on, I had symmetry on, turn that off. You know, squish that in. And for this case too, also if you want to see this detail, we're probably going to want to make this a lot thicker as well for when we go to print it. Everything eventually, because now this has subdivisions, I'll just close the hole so that way it becomes a full piece that just gets merged onto the full character. Go ahead and pull that out. All right, let's sculpt some cloth here. I'm gonna kind of adjust this geometry a bit to find where her pant line was again. She's got some baggy, kind of like baggy clothes, so I'll make sure that I kind of make sure that I'm incorporating that. And think about where it's stretching and things as well. It's important. Put that in. Not necessary for a mini, but for a sculpt you'd use for game or animation. When it comes to the skin details, again, that's still personal preference, and that's still based on the style of your game. If you look at something like Overwatch, Overwatch doesn't have, you know, skin textures. It's just kind of like smooth and painted. Same thing with like something like League of Legends. But you can also look at something like Final Fantasy VII, where Cloud is a very stylized looking character, but also has like skin, kind of like pore texture and realistic skin materials, right? So it all depends on style of what you're going for. Most time for my personal work and style, I don't usually do the skin detailing stuff. I like kind of a little bit more like painterly or stylized finish. Man, my brush isn't liking me. Cause it seems like my pen pressure went out. Let's see if, yeah, see that little like dotting? Doesn't like me. Hold on. I'm not gonna be able to sculpt this if it's gonna. I'm gonna save this real quick. And I'm going to close ZBrush real fast. So, intermission, 1 second. Because I cannot sculpt, because I have pen pressure in here, right? Uh-oh, where'd my stuff go? It's waking out on me, stop it, there we go. Okay, yeah, so that has pen pressure. It's just being funky in ZBrush, so. Corey's asking, does the character use the rope tied around her waist as an accessory or a weapon? I think it's just more of an accessory. I think in more detailed scopes, if I had more time, it would probably attach to maybe like her satchel or something like that. But I think it's more of a decorative thing, and also just a stylized choice of getting her something that's kind of like big and cool, to break up some shapes as well. Again, her fighting style eventually will be just turning into animals since she's a druid. So, okay, let's see if this works. Doesn't seem it still doesn't like me, but if I turn down the stepping. Ooh, it's being annoying. That's okay. I'm just gonna try. I'm gonna try, guys. I'll just make do. I don't know why it's being so broken. I really hate when it does this. It leads to not nice looking folds. I'm just trying to get overall, where would the stretching be? Where would the cloth hang down? If I'm looking at it from like gravity's perspective, the gravity would probably be hanging down this way. So it'd be more folding and bunching on the inside than there would on the outside. There'd be a bit of straining because the character's hips are up here, so this is stretching all down into this and creating folds. Brush, why? Why are you like this? Jeez, it really doesn't like me right now. Look at this. Look how terrible that looks. I can't figure out how to reset this pen pressure. It's making me very sad right now. Ghost wants me to try initializing ZBrush. Is that in preferences? I don't remember where that is. Oh, there it is. Oh, then I'd have to reload my custom tool. Let's see what happens. Ooh, good old-fashioned ZBrush. Let's see if that worked. Ooh, is that kind of where it looks like it? It's hard to tell. I think it's still doing that same. It feels a little better. Oh well. No worries, I'll just keep sculpting. So just plotting in where that stuff would be, and you could get all the more detailed with it. And again, I like to kind of use the I like to use a standard brush, and then I like to use the Damien standard to kind of like crease and sharpen that stuff. I'm also going to use smooth directional right now in hopes that that'll help kind of my poor brush making. Hopefully it'll help me out a little bit because of my tablet. But tablet's being very lumpy. But smooth directional is a great tool to be able to smooth out forms in one direction and then keep the forms going in another. It's one of my favorite tools to use. It's super, super useful for this stuff. Oh, wait. Nope. I got excited. I thought maybe it was because it was flipped, but it wasn't. I do think the shirt is flipped, so we'll do that, but it wasn't flipped. Yeah, you just want to get some cool stuff that's wrapping and that looks very organic and kind of like one folds that moves into another. And you can kind of establish where this stuff is, and you can use the move tool just to kind of give it more weight, you know? Which is, for example, these folds would probably be kind of like curving down, right? Because of gravity. So you kind of start to implement stuff like that into the sculpt. As you start kind of figuring out the placement of these things, it's kind of hard to sculpt gravity in there. It's easier just to kind of move it and warp it into kind of like a compressed state. And then same thing with the shirt. And I think on the sculpt here, I mean, it'll suck to do it now, but we had, you know, kind of these cool lines. You can see how dotted it is. I don't know why it's doing that, but. And start sculpting in where these folds would be. And again, this would be just a way to block in this stuff. And then as you kind of continue, the back doesn't really matter because you can't see it. But you can always sculpt it in if you feel like it. And adjust anything that doesn't make any sense, you know? So maybe this got kind of messed up while we were posing. That's not a really big deal. We kind of start bringing back that depth that we had into stuff. You can smooth that out. Again, there you'd see more kind of like folds pressing and being tight on this side and then kind of billowing outwards because it's stretching from one and kind of, you know, the looseness is all up through here. So you could just make sure that this has a little bit less folds because it's kind of flowing and it's not attached to anything, whereas this is kind of getting folds from being stuck to her body on the other side. And then we can also turn on the back and front tassels, and we'll also turn on the base so we can look at the base. You can see that she's a little too big. But we can always move this, and what I can do is kind of, you can have fun with the base, is we can jut out like a little rock. So that way she kind of stands on it properly. And we'll do that in a second. Now I can take this one, I'll turn off symmetry, and I'll rotate this around and get something. I kind of want to get something close, and then what I'll do is I'm going to insert more edge loops here, and then I'll use the bend curve tool to pull this out so I can start adding some curvature. We'll have to inflate that later for it to be a lot thicker to print. We can do something like that. Doing the same thing, bring this up. Get something semi-accurate. And then I'm going to do the same thing. Use the bend curve tool. Pull this out, pull this out. That might be a little too long for a print, so we can always shorten it. Oh, maybe closing Photoshop might work. We'll see. Let me see. I don't know why it would be so. I've had it open before, but you could be right. Photoshop is weird. I would blame Photoshop in that matter and not actually ZBrush, but. And then again, if I was to print this, I am going to print it, but I would inflate this by like a lot because it's such a flying piece. So in reality, it would be something pretty thick. Because again, we're going to be printing it at something like maybe that big, I think. So, you want that to be pretty sturdy. If you print something this thin, one, it might not even print, but two, it's going to break off just like super easily. Actually, I have a rock. No, I'm not going to worry about it. I was going to say I have a rock that I could probably place in here, but I can just sculpt one. Show you guys how I would go about sculpting a rock here. So we could do something kind of fun here. I'll get something kind of in place. Whoa. My smooth brush is gonna be wild. So now what I can do is I can just run a Dynamesh on it. And I'll do it pretty high res just to begin with, because I just need the topology. There we go. And now I can use the trim dynamic brush to kind of start carving in some flat areas. And beveling some of these edges. And I think I want to rotate this so it's more towards the front. And this is kind of fun to do to your bases to give them a bit more, you know, life. She's standing on that. There we go. Gotta be gentle with the trim dynamic, but it works really well to create little nice choppy bevels here. Again, be gentle. The focal shift's really high on it. I'm trying to avoid anything that has like a sharp edge. I'm trying to give everything kind of like that rock bevel. You can give your bevels bevels and start kind of breaking up that surface more and more. Then when you have something kind of like this, what you can do is, what I like to do is I will store a morph target. And then I'll go in here and I'll like really carve in some just like really I'll try to be as random as I can with this. Because I kind of I just want it to sink and go in really weirdly. I'll do something like that, which seems really strange. Smooth it out. And then I'll take my morph brush and I'll give it a nice hard alpha. And that'll kind of bring back areas and it'll create some cool cracks and crevicing. So kind of do something like that. A big maybe crack running down the side. Are fighting shoes or clogs available? No, she just goes barefoot. Easier for her to climb trees. And also, I feel like her attire, if I had more time, I would make her clothes feel a little more tattered because sometimes she might have to rip out of them to transform into giant bears and things, so she doesn't always have the time. So it's easier for her to just not wear shoes. She's destroyed so many shoes in the process of turning into animals. Although in D&D, technically you can absorb your clothes. So this just adds like a little bit of extra weird kind of like chipping accidents that you would maybe see on a rock. And this is really fast too. This is just kind of like a base of what you could get. And then probably a little too deep in some areas. And then what I would probably do is make her slightly smaller. Because she doesn't, because I think this is as much as I would want to, you know, I can't stretch this base. So again, can make her slightly smaller, and I think it'd be just fine. Because if I measure where an inch would be on this, let's see, it's gonna be about that big in reality, which is pretty big actually. That's like a pretty decent size if I compare it to my raptor and stuff. So I can make her probably slightly smaller, or I can choose to bring her foot in more. So this is where, one, I will save, and two, this is where now you can go back into your transpose master and just adjust slight things for the pose itself with the base. So now I can go in and bring this all back to a T pose. And I can just kind of grab, stop autosaving. This and this. And I'm just going to mask this whole area here. You can pull that in a bit more. And get it almost touching. And I can just use the move tool to kind of pull this stuff in. And if I feel like she's really hanging on the edge, I can just add more little rocks and stuff. I can just pull that in a little bit more. Right. Now I can go, okay, do the things. And you can see it's just a little bit off the ground, so I just wanted to rotate it. Wookie is asking, the base is reference for your printing size? Yes. So for normal humanoid characters, or for characters that you play in D&D, your base has to be an inch, because it needs to fit into one square on the tabletop. So there are a certain size. If I ever heard of Moonbreaker, it's around that size. I'm not sure what Moonbreaker is, but yeah. So then we can bring her in, and now we can also just duplicate this rock if we wanted to, and rotate it around and scale it down. If we feel like, you know, maybe her foot's a little too far off or whatever, we can kind of do something like that. You know, and then we can populate this with like little rocks and stuff too. But that way it doesn't feel like, you don't want just like 1-2 rock, you want it to, you know, feel like it's kind of part of a whole little set thing, you know. But I do want her foot heel to hang off, like as if she's, you know, grabbing, or as if she's standing on her toes, you know, on that side. So now we have something like that. And then for our final last little thing, oh, the whites of her eyes. That's what it's missing. Let's see. There they are. That's the one thing that didn't move for some reason. So we'll try to find those and try to pose one, and then because her eyes are the same, you know, with the cross, I can just rotate it until I find it. There we go. You can see for printing, there are actual cylinders that go in, but it gives me something to, if I was to like paint this later, but also when if you print it at a right scale, you'll be able to see kind of like the whites of her eyes, which is cool. Oh, Moonbreaker's a D&D type game. Okay. I do not know of it yet. Now we can do something where we can give her maybe a little smirk or something. Bring her eyebrow down. And then we can adjust her skin. Give this some more volume. Hide her bangs for a second. We can kind of pinch her stuff. We can curl her nose up a little bit too. This is where adding that asymmetry is very helpful. We can make sure that maybe this side of her eye kind of squinting more. Again, that thickness, it might look weird up close, but I would make this even thicker for printing if you wanted to see your eyebrows at all, you would have to make them pretty thick and stand out quite a bit. Kind of make her nose curl a little bit. Put her hair back on. And there you have it. Dude, just under the mark. Look at that. Pretty good, except for painting the base. I didn't do that, but not bad. And there you have it. There's our character all nice and shaded. Just gonna add this to make it the same color as the base. So it kind of blends in. There we go. And there you go. And there's our Druid character all nice and ready to go for our game. Not quite printable yet. Remember, we just have to add some thicknesses to little things and all that and jazz it up, and it would look really cool. My goal is to print it, but unfortunately, I'll probably just post it on my Instagram. So if I do that, you guys can see it there. So be on the lookout for that. If you guys don't follow me, definitely check that out if you want to. I'm on Instagram at Steak and Eggs. But yeah, so that's our character all nice and posed and wrapped up. Next week we'll be still doing a D&D character, but we're going to be doing a different one because we'll be sculpting different characters from, again, the campaign that I'm playing, and get to play with all these characters later on, which will be a lot of fun. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Enjoy the rest of your night. Thanks for joining me, Ashley, on Archetype. And I will catch you guys next week. So take care. Bye.